Gamers are always spouting off about how the RetroTink is the king of analog video upscaling, but these things are so expensive that only royalty could afford them. And don't even get me started on the RetroTink 4K. It literally costs more than a PS5. How about OSSCs? They are a bit more affordable, but why are there so many settings? I just want to plug and play a variety of old consoles at the highest picture quality possible. I'm not here to play CRT Simulator 2024. But what if I told you there is a cheaper alternative? No, not that. The Mcbazel ODV GBS-C converter delivers nearly the same quality as the likes of the RetroTink 5X or top tier OSSCs. It has simpler controls, plenty of compatibility, and it's only a fraction of the price. It may look like a toy compared to some of the competition, but I'm going to show you why this little device might be worthwhile if you're looking into playing your old PlayStation consoles. And yeah, this video is just me trying to justify my purchase. With the ever-increasing popularity of retro gaming, more and more video adapters have come onto the scene over the last couple of years. These devices allow various analog video outputs to be upscaled or to more modern digital formats like HDMI in order to work on modern TVs. Of course, you could go and buy a CRT for the most authentic experience, but even those are getting rarer, pricier, and they've always been inconvenient, but it's definitely not getting any easier to fit these into your battle station. And just look at these prices and shipping costs if you don't believe me. For most retro enthusiasts online, they'll say that the buck stops with the RetroTink 5X or the OSSC Pro as the ultimate all-in-one analog video upscaler. But these devices also take all your bucks because they cost over $300 US. So what if you're on a tighter budget like myself? That takes us to the likes of OSSCs or the Mcbazel GBS-C. Let's start with the OSSC. The name stands for Open Source Scan Converter, which also sort of explains what they are. These little devices are an open source design, meaning that there are many variations of the same device for sale online, ranging from cheap and cheaply made models to more well-known, high-quality spec versions like this one here, which costs about $120 US. They take analog video inputs and convert them to digital signals, either upscaling the output or just doing pass-through as a raw 240p or 480i or whatever other resolution you throw at it. Compared to those cheaper $10 adapters, OSSCs work on a more granular basis, processing the signal scan line by scan line, which removes almost any input lag and gets the purest picture quality possible from the original device when you convert it to a modern video input like HDMI. And going back to upscaling, this is sometimes necessary because not all modern displays support these older resolutions, especially interlaced signals like 480i is getting less common these days, and 480i was very common on 6th gen consoles like the PS2, the GameCube, and the Dreamcast. And speaking of 480i, that's sort of where the Mcbazel comes into play, but before we get to that, let's quickly compare the inputs of these two devices. You'll notice that they both have VGA pass-through and an HDMI output. They also both have SCART and some simple controls, but beyond that is where they start to diverge. The OSSC has two 3.5mm jacks, one for input and output, as well as a JTAG connector, which allows a serial connection to update the firmware and such if you so desire. Sounds pretty technical. And right here is an IR receiver for a remote control. And then on this particular model that we're looking at, there's only component WiBA inputs. So if you want to connect the audio cables, you'll need to get a separate adapter to go into the 3.5mm input, or output I guess. Meanwhile, the Mcbazel has a full array of component inputs, including the audio cables. This means that the Mcbazel is more easily compatible with certain consoles from the 5th, 6th, and early 7th generation. And when you take cost into consideration, the Mcbazel is around $90 US, while the OSSC is already $120 without the necessary audio adapter included, so the value proposition of the Mcbazel starts to speak for itself already. But enough blabbering about the hardware, let's see what these things can do. Here's both the OSSC and the Mcbazel running the same 480i game. You'll notice that the OSSC has a little bit of flicker and slightly more jagged edges. This is because the OSSC can only process 480i signals using a bob or line doubling deinterlacing technique, which can look rougher and result in a bobbing effect on the final image. This also means that the upscaled resolution is limited to 960p maximum. Meanwhile, the Mcbazel here uses a motion adaptive deinterlacing algorithm very similar to the RetroTink, which allows for more output resolution options and looks much smoother on the edges, as well as in the picture overall. When you switch to something even older though, like the SNES that runs around 240p, both devices look nearly the same before you get into the rabbit hole of various scanline simulation options and color correction. The OSSC has this remote control which opens up a huge amount of customization. While the Mcbazel is a lot simpler on the surface, it only offers a variety of resolution options, but it also has a sort of hidden feature. If you open your phone or your computer and connect to this Wi-Fi access point, you can actually navigate to the local web address of the device on your browser, and you get a couple more options with the Mcbazel. So you get scanline options, you can do a little bit of picture adjustment and color correction options. This might make you say, what? That's just as complicated as the OSSC. But I would argue that these settings are fairly limited to things that just help get your video output working in more types of displays than some of the more in-depth post-processing effects that are available on the OSSC. From a purely visual standpoint, you'll see that the OSSC is usually worse on interlaced content compared to the Mcbazel, and then the Mcbazel on the other hand has some color issues compared to the RetroTink 5X, but nothing you would notice if not for having them side by side in this direct comparison. As for latency, I think any of the devices listed in this video are pretty much indistinguishable from each other. So in the end, it's cheaper, it does not require as many adapters and extra dongles for PlayStation systems specifically, and it has much more limited but also much more straightforward settings. It has better 480i interpretation out of the box, so for consoles from the 5th to 7th generation especially, this might be the strongest path for most users. But if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of scan lines, adding post-processing effects, and playing CRT Simulator 2024 basically, and you have a higher budget, either the RetroTink or OSSCs are still a good way to go. Or if you have a huge budget, go for that RetroTink 4K. It looks really cool, but it's just an outrageous price for me. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it this far, like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And let me know in the comments which upscaler you think looks the best.